Okay, so number 5 was write a program that calculates a random number between 1 to 100, and the program should ask the user to guess the number. So the optional part here, though, was to modify the program so that instead of you guessing what the number was, it's the computer guessing what the number was. And specifically, it was to have the computer guess it in 7 or less guesses. So the first thing is that we should keep in mind that having the computer guess your number means that the computer has to ask for whether the number was too high or too low, so you have to be responsible for that. So why don't we first start off with, let's just have the computer respond to the player, so that when the computer will put a number in, and the player will just say high or low, and depending on the answer, the computer will guess again. And the trick here is that to get it to do it in 7 or less guesses, really the key is that you need to make sure that you are guessing the right number, like the best number for that point. So I actually, Clark was asking about this, and specifically you kind of have to put yourself in the perspective of a computer. Like, if you and I were playing a game of guess the number together, what would be like the first number that you would guess? 50, right? Because like that's the highest chance of covering whether it's high or low, right? And if I say that number is too low, what is the next number that you guess, right?
75.
Why is it 75?
It's in the middle of 50 and 100.
Right, so you want to divide the numbers in half every time, right? You want to guess, if it's too high, you want to guess halfway between what you currently have and the lowest number you've guessed so far, right? So I know that 75 is a number, and if I say that number is too high, now what is your next guess going to be? So you know that 50 is too low and 75 is too high.
The half of.
Right, you take the middle of those two, the average, you can take the average of those. Oops. 75. So 62.5, we'll just say 63. And if I say that's still too high, then what do? You guess between 63 and 50, right? So 57. And so on and so forth, right? Like if I say that that's too low, now I know it's between these two numbers, and let's just say it's like 59, or it would be 60 in this case. If I say that it's just too high, it's either going to be, we'll say it's 58. If that's too low, then it's got to be 59, right? So you can have it guess the right answer just by cutting it in half, cutting that guess in half every time. So that's what we're going to do.
Couldn't you just automatically, by 7, you don't get it, if the computer doesn't get it in 7 chances, automatically have the computer give the answer that you had before?
Give the answer that you had before.
That you first typed in. Just display that.
No, you wouldn't. You're not typing in an answer at this point. Like the only thing you're doing is saying the number is too high, the number is too low, or you're correct.
That's what I'm saying. You type number 50, right?
You're not typing in a number.
Oh.
You are just saying, you in your head are thinking of a number, and the computer is guessing what it is, right?
I had to do it the other way around.
What I did to the homework, instead of like you telling it it's higher, the number you think the number that the computer guess is higher, I put you type in if the number is high, or if you need to go high, or if you need to go low.
If you need to go high or you need to go low, so you flipped it. It's like go higher. That's fine. Like that's essentially the same thing, right? Yeah. It doesn't really matter for that aspect, so it's more about like your personal taste, right?
These aren't all those. These are just part of the room.
So I would say the first thing you need to do is you need to get some input from the user. So you need to say, hey, my guess is something. I'm just gonna put a random number here because I'm not actually gonna do that logic first. I always like to do piecemeal at a time. So I like to focus on one problem at a time. I don't want to focus on the, hey, guess the right number part. I just want to focus on the input part. I just want to have the computer continue to ask and repeat until you guess it correctly. So I need to process high, low, or correct as inputs, and if I guess correct, then I'm going to end the program. That's really what I want to, right? And then what I really want so we're going to read in a string, which is going to be the player response. Okay. Oops. And I just want to put an if statement here, and we can do several things here. One, we want to either validate the input, which I'll do afterwards, and also we want to test to see if it was high, low, or correct, and then do different things based on that. Okay. So first thing is if the player response is equal to correct, then we're just going to break out a loop. And okay, that's kind of the first thing I want to do. Is I just want to make it loop until you type in the word correct. I might need to do a get line here. Okay, so there's correct, and the program exits. Cool. We're just going to do So I'm just going to add the conditions for if the player response was too high or too low. Then the other case is basically didn't understand. Oh, I should make this thing a little bigger for you guys. So you guys can see as I'm typing these inputs, then once correct is done, it exits. And I can spit out something too when the guess is correct. Okay, so this is basically the loop I need to do. So all I really need to do at this point now that I have this series of if-else-if statements, is figure out what the guess should be. Right now the guess is just a random number, but what I want to do is actually I want this thing to be a specific number based on the last guesses that were done. So the first thing though is that there is no randomness in the computer number guessing, right? It's always a specific number. And it's always based on what the last guess was, right? So in order for you to guess the new number correctly, you actually need to base it on what the previous low number was or the previous high number was, right? So we're going to have a couple variables here. We're going to have a guess, which is going to be equal to 50 by start, because we know that that's what our numbers go between. And we're just going to put that in here. So he's going to put his guess here. And in the case, we have to basically think about each of these two cases here, like what happens when the guess is too high and what happens when the guess is too low. I know if the guess is too high, I need to basically cut my guess in half. But it's actually not just in half, it's based on what the lowest number I guessed was to that point, right? So if I set the lowest and the highest to there, I'm going to create a couple more variables. I can use these two numbers to figure out what my new guess should be. Just like what we did in here, right? I'm going to guess 50 to start. If I tell the computer that's too low, the computer has to guess a new number here that's between the current guess and the highest guess that I have so far, right? And I know that if this is too low, this can become my new lowest number, right? So if I guess too low, I'm going to set my lowest number equal to my guess. And I'm going to get my guess equal to my highest number plus my lowest number divided by 2. So this variable becomes my current guess because it was too low. And then I use that immediately with the highest number and I divide by 2 to figure out what my new guess should be. Okay? So let's just run this and see what he ends up guessing. If I say low, his next guess is 75. You guys see that up here? Here? If I say low again, his guess will be 87, right? And I'm going to say my guess is 99. I don't know. 93, 96, 98, 99. Okay? So by adjusting this number here, it affects what my guess is by just taking the average of the two. All right. So it's the same idea for the highest. If it gets too high, then set your highest equal to your guess. Like so. So let's pick a number here. Let's pick like 13. We're going to say his guess is too high. Too high still. Oops. 13. Too high. Too high. Never found the guess. So the magic is really just you need to have 3 variables for this to guess lowest and highest. And by having these two, you're basically, imagine like kind of like bookends that are on either end of like a number line, right? You're kind of like bringing them in to like center in on what the guess is. And at the end, it's really just asking for the average of the current highest and the current lowest number that you have.
I did everything except for divide by 2. That's
Oh.
what was throwing me off.
I see. Yeah.
I had pretty much highest and lowest as a variable. I just didn't have that. That's what it should be.
And if you want to keep track of the number of guesses, you can always just have a counter here.
Got 2.
And all you have to do is just add 1 to it every time that you actually have a guess. And you can even print it out right here.
This might be a silly question, but I'm still a little confused on what's the difference between like the plus plus and the plus equals 1.
Nothing. There's no difference.
Okay.
It's purely convenience. Like you can. This requires 1 less character.
Yeah. Okay.
So oftentimes this is just a little bit easier to read. Plus, like you don't have to think about it. It's kind of like when you're reading a book. Like some words might trip you up because like, oh, I just don't really get that. It's more like how fast can you read this? You have to actually parse, is that actually a 1 or is that a 2 or 3 or 4 or 5?
Well,
Typically,
plus is just,
yeah, typically you do plus equal if it's like more than just 1. You know, this is just by convention. This is kind of like, oh, I can at a glance immediately look at that and say, okay, it's just adding 1 to it, right? Eventually you get to the point where it's just like, oh, well, the person writing this wants me to know that he just wants to add 1 to this number, right? Whereas if you did it like this, maybe you want to let them know that, oh, hold up, maybe it's not always 1. Sometimes you'll have like, I don't know, some other variable which is like
20.
num to add. Oh yeah, or 20, like that, for score or something. Okay. All right, questions on this? It's not actually as difficult as it sounds, but the problem is that you have to know like how to manage the highest and lowest, and that part is, I think, a little bit more difficult. Is understanding like that you need to have you need to actually have variables to track it. And if you try to do it without those variables, that's going to be near impossible. I don't even know if you can actually do it without those 2 variables.
I tried no.
Yeah, yeah. If you just have 1 variable for your guess, I'm pretty sure you can't do it.
I mean, you could, but it wouldn't be accurate. It'd just be random.
It would be random, yeah.
Yeah, it would be.
Like the way that you come to this conclusion that you need variables is, again, you think it through in your head, right? You write this out in your head, like what are you doing in your head to know that your next guess should be 63 in the case where 75 was too high? Well, why is it 63? Well, because I guessed 50 already before, and 75 is the highest right now, so I just need to take the average of those two. Oh, well, that means that I need to remember what my lowest and my highest are, right? Like, if you think about things logically from your perspective, a lot of times just writing it out on pencil and paper can help you determine what algorithm you need, right? Yeah, seriously, like you actually, everyone still uses pencils and paper, like especially when you're trying to solve problems. It's invaluable to be able to like draw stuff or to be able to write stuff down. So like everyone keeps a notebook by their side to like write stuff down, right? All right, any questions on that?